So this just might be the cutest way to use up paper scraps that I've made yet. Today I'm turning a pile of leftover crumb cake cardstock into a woven basket using a simple paper weaving technique, and then building a full strawberry design on top of it. I'm working with a standard A6 card base. I noticed that one of the scraps is already the perfect width at about 1 centimetre, so I set that aside to become the top edge of the basket. Then I take some of the thicker scraps and cut them down into thinner strips. They're roughly 1/2 centimetre wide. They don't have to be exact. I like the slightly imperfect look for this style of weaving. To give me a guide to start the basket, I attach that 1 centimetre strip first. On the right hand side, I angle the edge slightly because I only want the basket to be partially visible on the card. The left side will be cropped straight off the page, so the angle only happens on one side. This strip becomes my guide for the weaving, helping me map out the shape before I start filling it in. From here, I begin weaving alternating horizontal and vertical strips, building up the structure piece by piece. Each time I add a strip, I press it down firmly so the weave tightens and starts to hold its shape. As I move toward the center, I gradually correct the angle so the basket feels more balanced. This weaving technique is something I originally shared back in season 1 of Card Making with Scraps. The printable is currently available in June for email subscribers, so if you want to try the original background version, I'll share the link in my description below. At this stage, I'm still experimenting a bit. I add a rim piece along the top edge of the basket, but in hindsight, I would have done this a little differently. I realized it would have been easier to trim some of the excess first before adding that top border. The other thing I would have done first is started with the side border because I want the top and the bottom of the basket to flow smoothly along the top and bottom. Once it was glued down, as you can see here, it's tricky to tuck anything underneath cleanly. I did try lifting the top a little bit to slip that side strip underneath, but the paper started to bend, so I ended up fixing it by adding a second layer over the top instead. I also add a matching strip along the bottom edge to finish the basket frame. At this point, I bring the A6 card base back in and check my sizing. Because I'm not working with a die cut shape, I'm adjusting as I go and wanted to make sure everything kind of fit and felt right in the space I had available. I trim away the excess woven pieces and tidy up the edges so nothing sticks out beyond the rim. The basket ends up slightly too wide, so I add a reinforcing strip behind the weave and then trim it down again so it sits neatly on the card. It's fun seeing this old weaving technique turned into a basket instead of a background. Next, I move into color selection. I pull out a mix of pink scraps inspired by a current color challenge palette and start sketching strawberries by hand. I lightly draw each shape in pencil on the cardstock first, just testing the proportions. Then I erase very lightly before colouring so the pencil lines don't show through too strongly once I add marker. I repeat this across different pink tones so I end up with a mix of strawberry sizes and shades. I then add a little depth using a sponge and ink, focusing on the edges of each strawberry to give them more dimension. Once everything's cut out, I realize some of my strawberries still feel a bit large, so I go back and adjust a few to create a better mix of sizes. I add texture details using a white gel pen, creating small seed marks on each strawberry. For the leaves, I use green scraps, and you can see this is a really well-loved scrap piece. And I used some dies from the Rooted in Nature set, which give a lovely layered texture when cut. I also bring in some tiny flowers. Originally I cut these in white and then I realised they could double as strawberry tops, so I recut them in green and trim them into different shapes to glue on top of my strawberries. To finish the floral element, I stamp and heat emboss small flowers in white on yellow cardstock. These were a little large at first, so again, I did a little trimming to help them better sit within the basket. For the background, I choose a green patterned paper with a soft polka dot design. It felt like the perfect match for the strawberries and the basket theme. I position the basket over the background and realize it's still a little too wide, so I trim it down slightly so it fits the card base properly. When I adhere it down, I make sure that I don't glue the top edge completely. I'm leaving about 1 centimetre to 1.5 centimetres free. This gives me space to tuck strawberries and leaves in behind the basket later as I'm sticking it all down. Next, I start placing the strawberries and adding the little green tops, positioning everything loosely first so I can adjust as I go. Once I'm happy with the general layout, I begin working in layers to adhere it down. I start with the elements that sit furthest back so that the pieces will be hidden behind others, like the back strawberry and some of the leaves. I glue those down first, then gradually build forward, layering the remaining strawberries and foliage on top. Leaving that top section of the basket unglued really pays off here because it lets me tuck elements in behind the rim and create a more natural dimensional look. To finish the design, I add a circular sentiment that says "For You." The original sketch I was following had a rectangle, but I tested a few options and the circle felt like the better fit for the composition. I had a small twine bow, securing it with a bit of tear and tape for strong hold. I press it down and tuck any of the excess adhesive neatly in behind the knot, then adjust the tails of the twine. This is a simple, scrap-friendly project that can be recreated in lots of different ways depending on what you have in your stash. And I love how it started with nothing more than leftover paper strips. If you'd like to try this technique yourself, I've also included a free Card Making with Scraps printable for email subscribers throughout June. It shows the original paper weaving background that inspired the basket idea, so you can see where the technique started and experiment with your own variations. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this project and I look forward to seeing you next time.